Lisa had always loved her corner house in Riverside Gardens. 8 years ago, when she first moved in, she fell in love with the extra space that came with the corner lot. While her neighbors had standard-sized yards, Lisa's property stretched out on 2 sides, giving her room for a beautiful garden, a long driveway, and plenty of space to breathe. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with families who kept to themselves and respected each other's boundaries. Well, most of them did anyway. There was one neighbor who seemed to think the rules didn't apply to her. That neighbor was Kelly, who lived in the house right next to Lisa's. Kelly had moved in about 3 years ago and quickly made herself known throughout the community. She was the type of person who always had an opinion about everything and wasn't shy about sharing it, whether it was complaining about someone's lawn height or suggesting changes to the community pool rules. Kelly always found something to say. What bothered Lisa most wasn't Kelly's outspoken nature, but rather how she seemed to bend rules whenever it suited her. When the HOA said no political signs could be displayed for more than 30 days before an election, Kelly kept hers up for 2 months. When parking regulations stated that boats and RVs couldn't be parked in driveways overnight, Kelly's brother's RV sat in her driveway for an entire week while he visited. Each time the HOA seemed to look the other way. Lisa had started to notice that Kelly had developed quite a friendship with Patricia, who served as the head of the HOA board. They were often seen chatting at community events, and Patricia always seemed to find excuses for why Kelly's rule-breaking wasn't really a big deal. The trouble that would change. Everything started on a Tuesday morning in March. Lisa was watering her flower beds when Kelly approached her fence. With a huge smile on her face, "Lisa, you'll never believe what I'm planning," Kelly announced, not bothering with a simple hello. "I'm throwing myself the most amazing 50th birthday party next month. It's going to be incredible." Lisa nodded politely and continued watering her plants. She had learned over the years that the best way to handle Kelly's enthusiasm was to listen quietly and respond minimally. "I'm thinking of having it in the community center, but honestly, that space is so boring," Kelly continued. "I want something special, you know? Something that really shows how important this milestone is." Over the next few days, Lisa noticed Kelly talking to various neighbors about her party plans. She seemed to be getting more excited by the day, and her ideas were growing bigger and more elaborate. Lisa overheard her telling another neighbor that she was planning to invite over 50 people and hire a DJ. The following week, Lisa received a notice in her mailbox from the HOA. It was a standard monthly newsletter, but tucked inside was a letter that made her blood run cold. The letter was addressed to all residents and announced that the community center would not be available for private parties during the month of April due to scheduled maintenance. Lisa thought nothing of it until she ran into Kelly at the mailbox the next morning. Kelly looked frustrated and was muttering under her breath about the HOA and their terrible timing. "Can you believe they're closing the community center right when I need it most?" Kelly said when she saw Lisa. "I've been planning this party for weeks, and now they pull this on me." Lisa made sympathetic noises, but privately she wondered why Kelly hadn't booked the community center in advance if her party was so important. "But don't worry," Kelly continued, her mood suddenly brightening. "I have other ideas. Patricia and I have been talking and we think we can work something out." That phrase, "work something out," would come back to haunt Lisa in ways she never could have imagined. 2 days later, Lisa was surprised to see Patricia walking through her yard, taking notes on a small notepad. Lisa went outside to see what was happening. "Oh, hi Lisa," Patricia said with an awkward smile. "I was just checking out the parking situation in the neighborhood. You know, making sure we're maximizing our space efficiently." Lisa found this odd since there had never been parking issues in their quiet neighborhood, but she didn't think much more about it. Patricia was always working on some kind of project or survey. The real shock came the following Tuesday when Lisa found an official HOA notice taped to her front door. She almost threw it away, thinking it was another routine newsletter, but something about the formal envelope made her look twice. Inside was a letter that made her read it 3 times before she could believe what she was seeing. The letter stated that her property had been designated for community overflow parking during a special neighborhood event on April 15th. It explained that due to the large expected attendance at a community celebration, additional parking space was needed, and her extended driveway and side yard had been selected as the most suitable location. The Letter went on to say that this decision had been made in consultation with the property owner, and that parking attendants would be directing guests to her property between the hours of 2 p.m. and midnight on the designated day. Lisa stared at the letter in complete confusion. She had never been consulted about anything. She had never agreed to let anyone park on her property. She had never even been told about any community celebration that would require overflow parking. Her confusion quickly turned to anger as she realized what must have happened. Kelly's party. This had to be about Kelly's birthday party. Somehow Kelly and Patricia had decided that Lisa's property was available for Kelly's guests to use, and they had made this decision without ever asking Lisa's permission. The more Lisa thought about it, the angrier she became. She had worked hard to maintain her property. Her lawn was perfectly manicured. Her garden beds were filled with flowers she had carefully chosen and planted herself. The idea of strangers trampling through her yard and parking cars all over her grass was infuriating. Lisa picked up her phone and dialed the HOA office number listed on the letterhead. When Patricia answered, Lisa tried to keep her voice calm and professional. "Hi, Patricia, this is Lisa from Maple Street. I received a letter today about parking for some kind of community event, and I think there's been a mistake." "Oh, hi, Lisa." Patricia's voice immediately became guarded. "What kind of mistake?" "Well, the letter says this was decided in consultation with me, but no one has ever talked to me about using my property for parking. I never agreed to this." There was a pause before Patricia responded. "Lisa, I'm sure Kelly mentioned it to you. She told me you were fine with helping out for her birthday celebration." "Kelly never asked me about parking," Lisa said firmly. "She mentioned her party, but she never asked to use my property, and I certainly never agreed to it." Another pause. "Well, the decision has already been made, Lisa. The invitations have been sent out, and people are counting on this parking arrangement. It's just for one evening, and it would really help out a neighbor in need." Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Patricia, this is my private property. You can't just decide to use it without my permission." "Actually, Lisa, if you read your HOA covenant carefully, you'll see that the board has certain authorities when it comes to community needs and emergency situations. This falls under our purview." Lisa had been a homeowner long enough to know that this didn't sound right, but she wasn't a lawyer, and Patricia was speaking with such confidence that it made her doubt herself. "I need to think about this, Patricia. This doesn't seem right to me." "I understand you might be surprised, Lisa, but sometimes we all need to make small sacrifices for the good of the community. I'm sure you'll see that this is the right thing to do." After Patricia hung up, Lisa sat in her kitchen, staring at the letter and feeling a mix of anger and confusion. She had never been in a situation like this before. Part of her wondered if she was overreacting, but the bigger part of her knew that something was very wrong with this whole situation. That evening, Lisa decided to take a walk through the neighborhood to clear her head and think about her next steps. As she passed Kelly's house, she could see Kelly in her backyard, talking animatedly on her phone. Even from a distance, Lisa could hear Kelly's excited voice talking about party details and how everything was coming together perfectly. The sound of Kelly's laughter drifted across the yard, and Lisa realized that while Kelly was celebrating her successful party planning, Lisa was stuck dealing with the consequences of decisions that had been made about her property without her input or consent. Walking back to her house, Lisa made a decision. She wasn't going to let this slide. Tomorrow, she would start figuring out exactly what her rights were and what she could do about this situation. She had worked too hard and invested too much in her home to let someone else make decisions about how her property would be used. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would test her patience, her resolve, and her creativity in ways she never could have imagined. The next morning, Lisa woke up determined to get to the bottom of this parking situation. She had spent most of the night thinking about the conversation with Patricia, and the more she thought about it, the more certain she became that something wasn't right. After her morning coffee, Lisa decided to do some research. She pulled out the thick folder containing all her HOA documents that she had received when she bought her house. She had read through them carefully back then, but that was 8 years ago, and she wanted to refresh her memory about what the HOA could and couldn't do. Sitting at her kitchen table, Lisa went through page after page of legal language and community guidelines. The more she read, the more confident she became that Patricia was wrong. Nowhere in any of the documents could she find anything that gave the HOA the right to designate private property for community use, without the owner's explicit written consent. Armed with this knowledge, Lisa decided to call the HOA office again. This time, she was going to be more prepared and more assertive. When Patricia answered the phone, her voice was noticeably cooler than it had been the day before. "Patricia, this is Lisa again. I spent some time going through my HOA documents last night, and I can't find anything that gives the board authority to use my property without my written permission. Lisa, I really don't have time to go through the legal details with you right now. The decision has been made, and frankly, I'm disappointed that you're being so difficult about helping a neighbor." The word difficult hit Lisa like a slap. She had always been a quiet, cooperative neighbor. She paid her HOA fees on time, kept her property in perfect condition, and had never caused any problems for anyone. "I'm not being difficult, Patricia. I'm asking about my rights as a property owner. This is my home we're talking about, and Kelly is your neighbor who needs help with a special celebration. Sometimes we need to think about more than just ourselves." Lisa felt her temper rising. "This isn't about being selfish. This is about someone making decisions about my property without asking me. How would you feel if I decided your backyard was perfect for a community barbecue and just announced it without talking to you first? That's completely different, Lisa, and you know it." "How is it different?" Patricia's voice became sharp. "Because Kelly asked permission and you said yes. She told me you were happy to help. Patricia, Kelly never asked me about parking. She mentioned her party in passing, but she never asked to use my property. I never said yes to anything." "Well, that's not what Kelly told me, and I have no reason to doubt her word." Lisa realized she was getting nowhere with Patricia over the phone. It was clear that Patricia had already made up her mind and wasn't interested in hearing Lisa's side of the story. "I want this in writing, Patricia. I want you to send me the specific HOA rule that allows you to designate my property for community parking without my consent." "Fine, Lisa. I'll have something sent to you. But I hope you'll reconsider your attitude about this whole situation." After hanging up, Lisa decided she needed to talk directly to Kelly. Maybe there had been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe Kelly really thought she had asked permission and Lisa had somehow missed it. Lisa walked over to Kelly's house and knocked on the front door. Kelly answered quickly, almost as if she had been expecting someone. "Oh, hi, Lisa. I was just about to come talk to you, actually." "Really? About what?" Kelly's smile looked forced. "Well, about the parking situation for my party. Patricia mentioned you had some concerns." "Kelly, did you tell Patricia that I agreed to let your party guests park on my property?" Kelly's smile faltered slightly. "Well, we talked about my party, remember? And you seemed fine with it." "We talked about your party, yes, but you never asked about parking on my property. You never asked to use my yard or my driveway." Kelly crossed her arms. "Lisa, come on. It's not like you're using that space for anything important. You've got all that extra room just sitting there empty most of the time." Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Kelly, it doesn't matter whether I'm using the space or not. It's my property. You can't just decide to use someone else's property without asking." "But I am asking. I'm asking now." "You're not asking, Kelly, you're telling. Patricia already sent me an official letter saying the decision has been made. You've already planned everything assuming you could use my space." Kelly's friendly mask finally slipped completely. "Look, Lisa, I've already sent out invitations to 57 people. I've hired a valet service. I've planned this whole thing. It's too late to change everything now just because you want to be difficult." There was that word again. "I'm not being difficult. I'm being reasonable. You should have asked me before you made all these plans." "Well, I figured you'd be happy to help. Neighbors are supposed to help each other, you know." Helping each other usually involves asking first and accepting no for an answer. Kelly's voice got louder. "So you're saying no? You're going to ruin my 50th birthday party just to prove some kind of point? I'm saying you should have asked me before you assumed you could use my property." "This is ridiculous, Lisa. It's one night. One single night. And you're going to make a big federal case out of it." Lisa could see that this conversation wasn't going anywhere productive. Kelly had clearly convinced herself that she was the victim in this situation. "Kelly, I never agreed to this. You need to make other arrangements." "It's too late for other arrangements. Everything is already planned." "Then you should have planned better." Kelly's face turned red. "Fine, Lisa. I can see what kind of neighbor you really are. I thought we were friends, but I guess I was wrong." Lisa walked back to her house feeling frustrated and upset. She had hoped that talking directly to Kelly would clear things up, but instead, it had made everything worse. Kelly was acting like Lisa was the one being unreasonable, when all Lisa was doing was protecting her own property rights. That afternoon, Lisa decided to call a friend who worked in real estate to get another opinion. When she explained the situation, her friend was shocked. "Lisa, they absolutely cannot do that. Your HOA can't just decide to use your private property for anything without your written consent. That's not how HOA rules work." Feeling more confident, Lisa decided to email Patricia with a formal response. She wrote a polite but firm email explaining that she had not consented to the use of her property and requesting that alternative arrangements be made for Kelly's party. The response came back within 2 hours, and it wasn't what Lisa had hoped for. Patricia's email was cold and formal, stating that the HOA board had reviewed the situation and determined that the parking arrangement was necessary and appropriate. The email ended with a warning that failure to comply with HOA decisions could result in fines and other penalties. Lisa printed out the email and stared at it in disbelief. They were actually threatening her with fines for refusing to let strangers park on her property. That evening, Lisa heard a commotion outside and looked out her window to see a delivery truck in Kelly's driveway. 2 men were unloading orange traffic cones and what looked like temporary fencing. Lisa watched as Kelly directed them to place some of the cones along the edge of Lisa's property. Lisa went outside immediately. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" One of the delivery men looked confused. "We're setting up for a party parking area, ma'am. This is the address we were given. This is my property. I didn't authorize this." Kelly appeared from behind the truck. "Lisa, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're just marking off the parking area so people know where to go on Saturday. You're not marking off anything on my property." "Kelly, the HOA approved this, Lisa. You can't interfere with official HOA business." Lisa was amazed by Kelly's boldness. "Watch me." Lisa walked over and began moving the orange cones off her property. Kelly followed her, arguing loudly about community spirit and being a good neighbor. The delivery men stood awkwardly by their truck, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Ma'am," one of them finally said, "we're going to need to come back when you folks have sorted this out." After they left, Kelly was furious. "Lisa, you're making a huge mistake. Patricia is not going to be happy about this. I don't care if Patricia is happy or not. This is my property." The next morning, Lisa found another letter from the HOA taped to her door. This one was even more formal and threatening than the last. It stated that Lisa was interfering with approved community activities, and that continued interference would result in a $500 fine for each day of non-compliance. Lisa read the letter 3 times, hardly believing what she was seeing. They were actually going to fine her for protecting her own property rights. The letter gave her until Friday to cease interference with approved parking arrangements or face penalties. Lisa realized she was in a real battle now. This wasn't just about Kelly's party anymore. This was about whether she had any rights at all as a property owner in this community. She spent the rest of the day making phone calls and doing research online. She called the county offices to ask about property rights. She looked up information about HOA authority and limitations. She even called a lawyer's office to ask about getting a consultation. Everything she learned confirmed what she already knew. The HOA had no legal right to designate her property for community use without her consent. They were bullying her, hoping she would back down rather than fight. By Friday afternoon, Lisa had made her decision. She wasn't going to back down. She had worked too hard for her home and her peace of mind to let someone else steamroll over her rights. She wrote one final email to Patricia, clearly stating that she did not consent to the use of her property for parking and that any vehicles parked on her property without permission would be considered trespassing. Patricia's response came within minutes. It was short and cold. "Your noncompliance has been noted. The fines will begin on Saturday." Lisa looked out her window at her beautiful, peaceful property and wondered what Saturday would bring. She knew it was going to be a long, difficult day, but she also knew she was doing the right thing. Sometimes standing up for what's right isn't easy, but it's still necessary. Little did she know that Saturday would be even worse than she could have imagined, and that this fight was far from over. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Lisa's mood perfectly. She had barely slept the night before, worrying about what the day would bring, despite all her protests and research proving she was right. Kelly's party was still scheduled to happen, and according to the HOA letters, Lisa's property was still designated as the overflow parking area. Lisa spent the morning doing yard work, partly to keep herself busy and partly to establish a visible presence on her own property. If people were going to try to park on her land, she wanted to be right there to stop them. Around 11 o'clock, she noticed unusual activity at Kelly's house. A catering truck pulled up, followed by a rental company van. People were setting up tables in Kelly's backyard, and Lisa could hear the sound of party decorations being arranged. At noon, the first sign of trouble arrived. A white van pulled up to Lisa's curb and two men in matching polo shirts got out. They walked directly onto Lisa's property and began placing orange cones in a pattern across her side yard and extended driveway. Lisa immediately went outside. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" The older of the two men looked at her with mild annoyance. "We're setting up the parking area for the party, ma'am. We're with Professional Valet Services. This is my property, and I haven't given anyone permission to park here." The man pulled out a clipboard and showed Lisa a work order. "Says here we're supposed to set up parking for 57 vehicles at this address. Are you saying this isn't the right place?" "This is the right address, but it's my private property." "I never authorized this." The younger man looked confused. "Ma'am, we were hired by the HOA. They gave us this address and told us to set up here. I don't care who hired you. This is my property and you need to leave." Just then Kelly appeared from her backyard, walking quickly toward them with a determined look on her face. "Lisa, what's the problem now? These men are just doing their job. Their job doesn't include setting up on my property without my permission." Kelly turned to the valet attendants. "I'm sorry about this. She's been difficult about the whole thing, but the HOA has approved everything. You can go ahead and set up." Lisa couldn't believe Kelly's boldness. "Kelly, you cannot give permission for people to use my property. The HOA can," and they did. The valet attendants looked back and forth between Lisa and Kelly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Ladies," the older man said, "we're going to need you to work this out before we can proceed. We can't set up if there's a dispute about the property." Kelly pulled out her phone. "Fine. I'll call Patricia right now and get this straightened out." Within minutes, Patricia arrived in her car looking irritated and impatient. She got out and marched over to where everyone was standing. "Lisa, what is the problem here? Why are you preventing these people from doing their job?" "Patricia, I've explained this multiple times. I never gave permission for anyone to park on my property. And I've explained to you that the HOA has the authority to make these decisions for the good of the community." Lisa had had enough. She pulled out the folder of documents she had prepared. "Show me exactly where in the HOA covenant it says you can use private property without the owner's consent." Patricia barely glanced at the papers. "Lisa, I don't have time for this legal nonsense. The party starts in 2 hours, and people are counting on this parking arrangement. Then you should have made sure you had legal authority before you promised something you couldn't deliver." Kelly stepped forward. "Lisa, please. This is my 50th birthday. Can't you just be a good neighbor for one day? Being a good neighbor doesn't mean letting people walk all over my property rights." The standoff continued for another 15 minutes, with Patricia becoming increasingly frustrated and Kelly becoming more dramatic about her ruined birthday party. Finally, the valet attendant said they would have to leave and come back when the situation was resolved. Lisa thought she had won a small victory, but her relief was short-lived. Around 1:30, just as the party was supposed to start, cars began arriving anyway. The first car pulled up and parked directly in front of Lisa's driveway, blocking her in. When Lisa went outside to ask the driver to move, the woman looked confused. "But I was told to park here. The invitation said there would be valet parking at this address." Lisa realized that Kelly had put her address on the invitations as the parking location. Before she could fully process this, more cars started arriving. Without valet attendants to direct them, party guests were parking wherever they could find space, and much of that space was on Lisa's property. Lisa ran from car to car, trying to explain to each driver that they were on private property and needed to move. Some people were understanding and moved their cars, but others argued with her. "Look, lady, I was told to park here," one man said rudely. "I'm not moving my car just because you're having some kind of neighborhood drama." "This is private property," Lisa tried to explain. "You're trespassing. The HOA said we could park here. Take it up with them." As more cars arrived, the situation became chaotic. Party guests were confused about where to park. Lisa was running around trying to get people to move their cars, and Kelly was nowhere to be seen. By 3 p.m., Lisa counted 28 cars parked on various parts of her property. Her carefully maintained lawn was being driven on and walked across. Her flower beds were being used as shortcuts to Kelly's backyard. Someone had even parked partially in her driveway, making it impossible for her to get her own car out. The breaking point came when Lisa discovered that several party guests were using her outdoor water spigot without permission. A group of children were playing in her side yard, and their parents were sitting on her front steps as if it were public property. Lisa tried calling the police, but the dispatcher told her it was a civil matter involving the HOA, and that officers couldn't get involved unless there was a criminal act taking place. She called Patricia, but the call went straight to voicemail. She called Kelly's house phone, but no one answered. Feeling desperate and overwhelmed, Lisa decided to document everything. She took photos of every car parked on her property, noting license plate numbers and the damage being done to her lawn and garden. She took videos of people walking through her yard and using her water spigot. Around 4 p.m., things got worse. A delivery truck arrived with additional tables and chairs for the party. The driver, unable to get close to Kelly's house due to all the parked cars, decided to use Lisa's driveway to unload everything. When Lisa protested, the driver became argumentative. "Lady, I've got a job to do. I can't carry these heavy tables 3 blocks because of your parking situation." "This isn't my parking situation. This is my driveway and you can't use it without permission." "Look, I was told by the party planner that this area was available for loading. I'm just following instructions." Lisa realized that Kelly had apparently told everyone involved in the party that Lisa's property was available for their use. The catering staff, the rental company, the party guests, everyone had been told they could use her space. As the afternoon wore on, the party got louder and more crowded. Music was blasting from Kelly's backyard and party guests were spilling over onto Lisa's property. Some people had set up lawn chairs in her side yard. Others were letting their children play on her lawn. The final straw came around 6 p.m. when Lisa discovered that someone had damaged her sprinkler system. A car had been parked too close to one of the sprinkler heads and had crushed it when the driver tried to get closer to the curb. Water was spraying everywhere, soaking Lisa's flower bed and creating a muddy mess. When she tried to find the owner of the car to let them know about the damage, no one would claim responsibility. "I don't know whose car that is," said one party guest. "There are so many people here, it could be anyone's." Lisa had to shut off her water main to stop the flooding, which meant she no longer had water pressure in her house. She was now dealing with property damage on top of everything else. As evening approached, the party showed no signs of winding down. If anything, it seemed to be getting bigger and louder. More cars kept arriving, and Lisa's property was completely overrun with vehicles and people. Around 8 p.m., Lisa finally saw Kelly for the first time all day. Kelly was walking across Lisa's yard with a group of friends, laughing loudly and carrying drinks. Lisa intercepted her. "Kelly, this has to stop. Look at what's happening to my property." Kelly looked around with what seemed like genuine surprise, as if she was seeing the chaos for the first time. "Oh, wow. It is pretty crowded over here, isn't it?" "Crowded? Kelly, my yard is destroyed. My sprinkler system is broken. People are treating my property like a public park. Well, I'm sure any damage can be fixed." "It's just grass and flowers, Lisa." Lisa stared at Kelly in amazement. "Just grass and flowers? This is my home, Kelly. I've spent years working on this garden." "Look, Lisa, I'm sorry if things got a little out of hand, but what did you expect? You knew we were having a big party. I expected you to have your party on your own property, not mine." Kelly shrugged. "Well, it's too late to change anything now. The party's already in full swing. We'll clean everything up tomorrow, I promise." Lisa realized there was no point in continuing the conversation. Kelly clearly didn't see anything wrong with what was happening, and she had no intention of trying to control her guests or move the cars. The party continued until well after midnight. Lisa stayed awake listening to the music, the laughter, and the sound of car doors slamming as people finally started to leave. The last car didn't pull away until almost 1 a.m. When Lisa woke up Sunday morning and looked outside, she almost cried. Her beautiful, well-maintained property looked like a disaster zone. Tire tracks crisscrossed her lawn. Her flower beds were trampled and littered with party trash. The damaged sprinkler head had created a muddy crater in one corner of her yard. There were beer bottles and paper plates scattered across her property. Someone had apparently spilled red punch on her front walkway, leaving a large purple stain. Her outdoor furniture had been moved around and left in the wrong places. Lisa spent the entire morning documenting the damage and beginning the cleanup process. As she picked up trash and tried to assess what could be repaired, she felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and determination. Kelly had gotten her big party, but at Lisa's expense. The HOA had flexed their authority, but they had done it illegally and unfairly. Lisa's property and peace of mind had been violated, and no one seemed to care. But as Lisa looked at the mess around her, she made a decision. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. If Kelly and Patricia and the HOA thought they could steamroll her and get away with it, they were about to learn otherwise. Lisa had been pushed around enough. Now it was time to push back, and she was going to do it in a way that none of them would ever forget. Saturday morning, July 15th, dawned bright and clear. Lisa woke up at 6 a.m., filled with nervous excitement and anticipation. Today was the day she had been planning for weeks, and she was ready. By 7 a.m., the auction team had arrived. Jake Morrison, the professional auctioneer, came with 2 assistants who began setting up tables and organizing merchandise across Lisa's front and side yard. The transformation was impressive. What had been empty lawn space was now filled with neatly arranged items for sale. Lisa had been amazed by how much stuff she had accumulated over the years. Books, furniture, kitchen appliances, decorative items, tools, and collectibles filled multiple tables. Friends and neighbors had also contributed items, turning the auction into a genuine community event. At 8:30 a.m., early shoppers started arriving. Lisa watched from her kitchen window as people parked along the street and began walking around the display tables, examining items and chatting with each other. The atmosphere was friendly and energetic, exactly what Lisa had hoped for. At 8:45, Lisa saw Kelly come out of her house and look across the street with obvious shock. Kelly had clearly underestimated how big and professional Lisa's auction would be. This wasn't just a garage sale. It was a legitimate, well-organized event that completely filled Lisa's property. At 9 a.m. sharp, Jake Morrison's voice boomed across the neighborhood as he began the auction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's estate auction. We have some wonderful items for you, so let's get started. Lisa positioned herself on her front porch where she could watch everything unfold. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered around Jake as he began auctioning the first items. People were bidding enthusiastically, and the professional atmosphere made everything feel important and official. Around 9:30, Lisa noticed unusual activity at Kelly's house. People were arriving for the anniversary party, but instead of the smooth valet parking operation Kelly had planned, chaos was breaking out. Cars were circling the neighborhood looking for parking spaces, but Lisa's entire property was occupied by auction attendees. The street parking was filled with people who had come for the auction. Kelly's guests were having to park blocks away and walk to the party. Lisa watched with satisfaction as Kelly came outside and began arguing with what appeared to be the valet service coordinator. Even from across the street, Lisa could see Kelly's animated gestures and frustrated expressions. At 10 a.m., Patricia arrived on the scene. Lisa saw her get out of her car and march directly over to where Jake was conducting the auction. Lisa quickly walked over to see what Patricia was planning to do. "Excuse me," Patricia said loudly, interrupting Jake in the middle of auctioning a vintage lamp. "This auction needs to stop immediately." Jake paused and looked at Patricia with professional calm. "Ma'am, do you have authority to shut down this legally permitted auction? I'm the HOA president, and this activity is disrupting a community event." Jake smiled politely. "Ma'am, I have all the proper permits for this auction. Unless you're a county official or law enforcement officer, I'm going to have to ask you to let me continue." Patricia's face turned red. "This is ridiculous. This woman is doing this out of spite." Several auction attendees turned to look at Patricia with disapproval. One older gentleman spoke up. "Lady, this is a legal auction. If you don't want to bid on anything, maybe you should move along." Lisa stepped forward. "Patricia, as you can see, I'm conducting legitimate business on my own property with all proper permits and authorizations. If you interfere with my legal auction, you'll be the one breaking the law." Patricia stared at Lisa with pure fury, Clearly realizing that she had no power in this situation, Lisa was completely within her rights and there was nothing Patricia could do about it. This isn't over. Lisa, Patricia said through gritted teeth. Actually, Patricia, I think it is, Lisa replied calmly. As Patricia stormed off, the auction crowd applauded. Several people came up to Lisa and expressed their support for what she was doing. Word had spread about the HOA conflict, and many people were enjoying seeing Lisa stand up for her rights. The auction continued throughout the morning and into the afternoon. Jake was excellent at his job, keeping the energy high and the bidding competitive. Lisa was amazed by how much money her accumulated items were bringing in. Meanwhile, the situation at Kelly's anniversary party was getting worse. Lisa could see frustrated guests walking long distances from their parking spots. The party seemed smaller than Kelly had planned, and the atmosphere appeared tense rather than celebratory. Around noon, Lisa was surprised to see a news van pull up. A reporter and cameraman got out and began filming the auction. Apparently, word about the unique situation had reached the local media. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Chen, approached Lisa during a brief break in the auction. Mrs. Chen, I'm Jessica from Channel 7 News. We heard about your situation with the HOA and your neighbor. Would you be willing to do a brief interview? Lisa agreed, and Jessica asked her to explain what had happened. Lisa gave a calm, factual account of the events, emphasizing that she had simply exercised her legal rights as a property owner. Some people might say this seems like revenge against your neighbor, Jessica said. Lisa smiled. Jessica, I'm not taking revenge. I'm conducting a legal auction on my own property with all proper permits. If that inconveniences someone who assumed they could use my property without permission, that's not my problem. The news crew also tried to interview Kelly, but she refused to talk to them. Patricia also declined to be interviewed, though she did make several angry comments off camera about spiteful neighbors and community disruption. By mid-afternoon, the auction was clearly a huge success. Dozens of items had been sold, Lisa was making good money, and the event had drawn a large, enthusiastic crowd. More importantly, Lisa's property was completely occupied, making it impossible for anyone to park there. Around 3 p.m., Lisa overheard Kelly on her cell phone, apparently talking to the party planner. Kelly sounded frustrated and defeated as she discussed the parking problems and how much smaller the party was than they had hoped. No, we can't move the party to next weekend, Kelly was saying. People have already made plans. We'll just have to deal with the parking situation somehow. Lisa felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Kelly was finally experiencing the consequences of her entitled behavior. Instead of just assuming she could use other people's property, Kelly was having to deal with the same parking challenges that every other party host faced. At 4 p.m., Jake announced that the auction would continue for 2 more hours. Business was still brisk, and there were plenty of items left to sell. Lisa's property would remain completely occupied until 6 p.m., effectively blocking any possibility of anniversary party parking. Around 4:30, Lisa was approached by an older man who introduced himself as Robert Martinez, a member of the HOA board. Mrs. Chen, I wanted to apologize for how this situation has been handled. I've been reviewing the HOA documents and it's clear that Patricia overstepped her authority. Lisa was surprised by Robert's approach. Thank you, Mr. Martinez, I appreciate that. Patricia convinced the board that you had agreed to the parking arrangement, but obviously that wasn't true. What happened to your property? During the birthday party was completely inappropriate. Robert explained that several board members had been uncomfortable with Patricia's handling of the situation but hadn't spoken up at the time. The news coverage and community reaction had prompted them to take a closer look at what had actually happened. The board is meeting on Monday to discuss Patricia's conduct and review our policies. I think you'll find that changes will be made. As the afternoon wore on, the contrast between Lisa's successful auction and Kelly's struggling anniversary party became more and more obvious. The auction was bustling with activity, while the anniversary party appeared to be winding down earlier than planned due to the parking difficulties and smaller turnout. At 5:30, Jake began auctioning the final items of the day. The crowd had remained strong throughout the afternoon, and people were still bidding enthusiastically. Lisa's auction had been a complete success from every perspective. As 6 p.m. approached, Jake began wrapping up the auction. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes today's estate auction. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you're happy with your purchases. The crowd began to disperse, but many people lingered to chat with Lisa and express their support for her situation. Several neighbors mentioned that they had been dealing with their own issues with Patricia's heavy-handed management style. As the last auction attendees left and the cleanup began, Lisa looked across the street at Kelly's house. The anniversary party appeared to be over, with only a few cars still parked in Kelly's driveway. It was a far cry from the big celebration Kelly had been planning. Around 7 p.m., as Jake and his team were finishing the cleanup, Kelly finally crossed the street to talk to Lisa. She looked tired and defeated. "Lisa, you got what you wanted. Are you happy now?" Lisa looked at Kelly calmly. "Kelly, all I wanted was for people to respect my property rights. That's not too much to ask. You ruined my anniversary party." "No, Kelly, I didn't ruin your anniversary party. You ruined your own party by assuming you could use someone else's property without permission. If you had planned your party to take place entirely on your own property, like every other reasonable person does, there wouldn't have been any problem." Kelly stared at Lisa for a long moment, clearly struggling with whether to continue arguing or just walk away. "I never meant for things to get so out of hand," Kelly said finally. "Kelly, the problem wasn't that things got out of hand. The problem was that you never asked permission in the first place. You just assumed you could make decisions about my property, and when I objected, you tried to force me to go along with it." Kelly looked down at the ground. "I guess I didn't think about it from your perspective." "That's exactly right. You didn't think about my perspective at all." The conversation ended awkwardly, with Kelly walking back to her house without saying goodbye. Lisa felt no satisfaction in Kelly's defeat. She had never wanted to hurt Kelly personally. She had simply wanted to establish boundaries and protect her rights. 3 days later, Lisa received a letter from the HOA board. The letter formally apologized for the unauthorized use of her property and announced that Patricia had resigned as board president. The letter also included a check covering the cost of repairing the damage to Lisa's lawn and sprinkler system. The letter explained that new policies had been implemented, requiring written property owner consent before any private property could be designated for community use. The invalid fines against Lisa were officially rescinded. 2 weeks after the auction, Lisa was working in her garden when she noticed a "for sale" sign being installed in Kelly's front yard. She wasn't surprised. Kelly had seemed increasingly uncomfortable in the neighborhood after the anniversary party incident. Lisa never spoke to Kelly again before Kelly moved out 6 weeks later. She felt no animosity toward Kelly personally, but she was glad to have a neighbor who would respect boundaries. The auction had raised over $3,000 for Lisa, money she used to make improvements to her garden and install a new sprinkler system. More importantly, she had established herself as someone who wouldn't be pushed around by bullies or intimidated by people who claimed authority they didn't actually have. Lisa's story became something of a legend in the neighborhood. People would point out her house and tell visitors about the woman who held an auction to protect her property rights. The story served as a reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with bullies is not to fight them directly, but to outsmart them using creativity and legal means. 6 months later, Lisa was elected to the HOA board herself, running on a platform of respecting property rights and transparent governance. She served 2 terms and helped establish policies that prevented future conflicts like the one she had experienced. Looking back, Lisa realized that the whole experience, as stressful and frustrating as it had been, had actually made her stronger and more confident. She had learned that she didn't have to accept unfair treatment just to avoid conflict. Sometimes standing up for yourself requires creativity, patience, and strategic thinking, but it's always worth doing. Lisa never regretted holding the auction. It had been the perfect solution to an impossible situation, and it had taught everyone involved some valuable lessons about respect, boundaries, and the importance of asking permission before making assumptions about other people's property.